That depends is the typical BS consulting answer. And of
Yeah.
course, I'm going to say that here.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change? I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode.
Hi there. Today on TruthWorks, we're joined by researcher, technologist, and author of the Skill Code, Matt Beane. Welcome from Santa Barbara, Matt.
Thank you very much. Seriously, very delighted to be here.
Yay! Yay! Hey, Matt, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this research? Like, does this start when you were young? I just have an inkling that it might have.
Yeah. When I started to publish papers, my mom was like, "That's my baby boy." So there is that kind of a story, and then there's a sort of a mid-career pivot story to be told too. So
when I used to interview engineers, I would say, "All right, what was your compulsion? What puzzle was it that you could never try and solve?" And I mean, always I got like, well, I did a 10,000 piece puzzle when I was 11, or I wrote my first video game when I was 4, some ridiculous thing like, so go all the way back there. Like, yeah, give us that.
You got it. Yeah, I don't have it within arm's reach, but I still have the original copy of the 1976 Usborne Guide to Robots, Computers in the Future.
Aww.
Large, glossy, I'm going to say 8.5, no, bigger than 8.5 by 11. These kind of made for maybe fourth grader level reading with giant, beautiful, glossy images of what the future was going to bring with robots and computers and the rest of it. And I would just as soon spend time on the living room carpet floor with that book in the sunshine than just about anything. So since I was a tiny kid, I would just inhale everything about technological and scientific possibility I could get my hands on. I was not the prototypical engineering kid who wanted to build stuff. I was a dreamer. So I spent more time trying to understand from the scientific point of view. My whole life, that's been sort of an obsession. And both my parents are educators. Both my parents were teachers when I was growing up. So how one went about building skill, the process of learning was just an out loud, detailed, rich conversation at home for me as a kid, in particular because my dad helped to start an alternative high school when I was a kid, which was a place for emotionally disturbed. I'm doing big air quotes here. We have better words. Better words, yeah. But he and his colleagues from different schools had to build a first-in-kind program to deal with kids who were drug addicted, whose parents were violent, who had terrible situations at home, or who had genuine mental illness, who were rejected, basically, by society and school. And they had to build a system that genuinely worked because they cared, and they did. So I watched him take a second look at what education was, how it functioned, how people really learned, and build something that was much more like books like Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed or Neil Postman's books were like on the coffee table. And my dad was just, Leo Buscaglia, this is a name that's a way throwback, but like honest, authentic, human-centered education that was driven through discovery and the questions of the individual as opposed to the gulag of sitting in rows and chairs and memorizing facts and time. And so that lit a fire in my brain about learning. And then school was much harder for me. But so that stream merged with the technology stream only really maybe 3 years before I applied to doctoral programs in the middle of a perfectly serviceable consulting career. So I was a principal in a small consulting firm that did leadership and sort of team dynamics consulting to executive teams, in particular, helping them have really touchy conversations productively. That was sort of my bread and butter. And I noticed the BlackBerry and the smartphone changing the way folks treated each other. Like a lot, a lot.
Mhm.
Then I started to get the technology bug again. I started to read books that were coming out at the time. I didn't agree with them all, but like the singularity is near was a big thing at the time, like 2007, 2008. And my wife one day was like, you talk a lot about this stuff. You're just like wandering our living room going off about, your job has a half-life and you should just go back to school. She was starting her own business at the time. I'm like, this is a terrible time. No way. And she gives me this look and goes, so when's a better time?
Aw.
And so I applied to school and then they let me in at MIT. And I announced within 6 months, like, I want to study robots, AI, and how people build skill at work. And I was off to the races. So
Oh.
that was in 2011.
Wow. So cool.
Yeah, such a good story. And I
Yeah.
love the part about natural learning. When I was looking at your TED Talk, and the beautiful part about, observe and try. I realized, Jessica, how much those basics apply to our work, particularly with people who are engineers or, I'm thinking about all the ways you described all the kids in your dad's class. I'm like, oh yeah, I knew all of them and we worked with them.
Yeah. I think what I found so interesting too, and you mentioned it in telling us a little bit about your story, but how technology changes things for the worse sometimes, right? So sometimes it's a beautiful, wonderful thing because you're propelled into a new place you've never been able to reach before. But then there's also, going back to your example of the BlackBerry and the iPhone, um, making it harder to have tough conversations and people not talking to each other. And, I was watching your TED Talk as well. And I'm like, oh, I was started thinking, like, well, do I want a person to operate on me or a robot? But I also, if there's a person, I want them to know what to do in case the robot fails. And,
Got it.
and then I was like, are robots making us dumber?
Yes. So that one has been a bug in my brain since about 2012. I just wrote a piece for in like October, November on my Substack about this.
I saw that, yeah.
Which is at wildworldofwork.org. But the name of the piece is "Don't Let AI Dumb You Down."
Mm.
And I'm at ground zero on this one. In fact, this is most of my research now, is studying how people use these technologies to solve problems, how the technologies themselves solve problems, and how that affects what we learn, who we connect with, our careers and stuff like that. And the short story is, everybody, if they have these technologies in their hands, especially now with everybody's got all these large language models for free, basically, you use it, you get a boost right away. That essay comes out faster. Even if especially if you know what you're doing, it accelerates you. You're happy. The person who loses out is the person who otherwise would have had a chance to rub elbows with you in that work. Somebody who was looking to build the skills that you have in the olden days. And by olden days, I mean like 3 years ago. You would have more collateral contact and could, by helping out in some meaningful way, build that next layer of skill that's going to accelerate you along. And these technologies just allow us all to get more self-serve results, whether it's robots, whether it's AI. And that's the point in the TED Talk. And I have a lot more data since then across a lot more occupations and types of organizations.
Well, let's go through that. And before we get into maybe the skill, because I want to really talk about the research that you're doing because I find it fascinating. But talk to me, because Patty and I, for our entire careers, have been working with teams to make them more and more effective, right? And through feedback, through conversation, through all of the hard things, right? Because
Yes.
when you're doing all this stuff at work, it's hard, but you're doing it with humans, and humans are humans. They make mistakes, they do things, they say things, they,
Don't
miss
we
work.
all?
Like, robots don't, they don't call in sick. So talk to us a little bit about like what you found with technology and team dynamics, and where things can go wrong, and where things can be amplified in a glorious way.
I wanted to jump in too. And as I was listening to you, I was thinking about collaboration because I think that's also what you're talking about, Jess, right? Is like the making mistakes, the interaction. And I was wondering, like a light bulb went off. It's like, is this what all the CEOs are craving now when they want everybody to come back to work? Like that, that's a great example of like
Yeah.
the technology's allowed us to do what we're doing right now,
Yeah.
have a
Yep.
conversation together. And yet it will never feel like being in the same room and going, oh, Matt, that's ridiculous. Wait a minute.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, no, so I give talks about the book and have been giving talks about the research basically since the TED Talk to audiences who are either have executive authority or another audiences like HR,
Mhm.
basically folks who are responsible for the health of the learning and development of
Mhm.
the organism
Mhm.
and the individuals in it. And especially after COVID, when I talk about the value of this taken for granted bond that emerges that allows for learning in the middle of the work, executives almost jump out of their chair and say, you have just given me the best possible ammunition I need to force people back into the office. And those are really valuable conversations because those are very savvy execs and they realize the minute those words come out of their mouth that you cannot get the toothpaste back in the tube.
Right.
That is not happening. They are running a business. They need to attract and retain talent and be flexible. So the question is, how do you recover some of that missing glue
Mhm.
while taking advantage of that? You only win by going in the upper right-hand corner of that 2x2, whatever the 2x2 is. And so it's got to be high contact, high collateral involvement of novices that build skill and get all the productivity gains. Otherwise, you're just playing it's a club
Mhm.
or
Mhm.
something. You can't do that. So those are then very hard, complicated, but interesting conversations about what solutions, social, technological, practical, are there to work in a distributed, asynchronous, digital way and make human connection richer, better, and more valuable for business and skill development than they could have been before all of that.
Mhm.
Ah.
Now it's possible
Mhm.
now, and so this is my work now. Obviously, with the book, that's the back third of the book. Basically, is like, look at folks. There's a $1 trillion problem that nobody quite owns, which is we're nuking this bond between experts and novices everywhere you look. But the good news is we now have an opportunity with the very irritating, technologies that are the irritant are a small dose of them are part of the solution, a new infrastructure for fine. You two get to have your lunch once in a while or your brunch or whatever to talk. This is an example of it, but we have to, I think, use AI to build new collaborative bonds, make better matches, help novices connect with experts to build skill. There are companies out there trying to build this kind of infrastructure, but it's getting 1/1000th the investment
Mhm.
compared to formal training about AI or formal
Yeah,
training.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
we're investing in targets we're used to, not in the infrastructure for learning and interaction for the future.
Mhm.
Okay, well, tell us some stories. Our listeners like examples and stories. Like, walk us through
Yes.
some of the more edgy, controversial kind of things you've found in your research.
Yeah, so I'll just take you to surgery. That one
Yeah.
tends to get eyebrows going up. That was my dissertation research. So for about 2.5 years, I was in 5 different hospitals in the OR for maybe 8 hours a day, most days of the week, with a
Do you
laptop.
like watching surgery? I
Yeah,
can't.
you find out within about 10 seconds whether you're up for
Oh.
that.
Sure.
And there's no some folks are absolutely fascinated, like almost like they can hear metal music playing in the background, like, yeah, that wasn't me. So there's a crowd. Once you can sort of hack it, you can look at that and be fine.
Right.
Then there's some folks in there that are like, this is their heavy metal concert and they're totally into it and focused.
Right.
Those are the people you want operating on
Of
you.
course.
Because they're like, it's their nerdy problem since they were a little kid,
Right.
right? You were talking about that. Then there's a chunk of just folks who can be fine with it. And then there are folks who definitely are not fine. And unfortunately, some of those folks are med students that have been banking their entire career on doing surgery. And in the first 10 seconds, they have to walk out. And they're done. Or actually, usually they end up on the floor. I watched a roughly comparable amount of robotic and open traditional surgery of the same kind. So you can imagine, bottom line, you might imagine somebody has a cancerous tumor in their kidney that needs to be cut out. There's one way to do it where you open the human being up, and the other way is robotically. The robotic version involves 4 to 6 like half-inch incisions and these laparoscopic tubes that go in, are all of which are attached to this 1,000-pound 4-armed robot that sits outside the patient. Once they've got that robot attached, the surgeon rips off their scrubs and walks over to a control console that is like a giant Xbox console you control with your hands and your feet.
Your feet?
And so the running joke that I started was that they're an organist, haha. But
wait, what are you controlling with your feet?
Energy. So, and also switching between instruments. So think you have 4 arms in the patient. Human beings have 2. And how this works then is one of those arms is your eyes. It has the camera, which is a stereoscopic camera that gives you 3D vision in this console. There's 3 other arms, and those all have instruments on them. So one might be a grasper, one's a cutter, one's a fenestrated bipolar, which is just a different type of gripper. You can swap in and out just different instruments on command. You can ask a scrub at bedside to do that. But bottom line, your hands only control 2 things, and you rotate control between those 3 things with your feet. And with another foot, you can send electrical energy or cautery, basically, to one of those graspers to cauterize, in other words, burn shut a vein or an artery to keep it closed.
Right.
Instead of doing lots of suturing, which damages tissue, it's much cleaner for the patient if you just burn that blood vessel shut or whatever. So yeah, it's this complicated dance of using your feet and your hands, but the human being is amazing. It just becomes second nature if you figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I noticed, though. Unlike open surgery, in most cases, for a year and a half, I was watching robotic surgery, and most people do not figure it out. Most residents start in their training, get on that console, and look like Bambi on the ice. It's like watching somebody trying to figure out an Xbox controller who's never quite done that before. You're just tentative and shaky and not sure what you're doing. You're not going to do damage to the patient. The surgeon's not going to let that happen. But it means basically you don't get to do much, and the surgeon pulls you out of the pool real fast. Like, okay, out of the pool, kid. That's it. And because you have 3 arms, you can do that procedure yourself. Let's say, Patty, you're the surgeon. You don't need that resident anymore at all. They are an optional participant. And guess what? Your patient's on the table. Every minute they spend under anesthesia is risk of stroke going up exponentially. So no, you don't get to mess around. I'm not going to give you an optional exploratory practice opportunity on this patient. Not going to happen. So the average resident was getting 10 minutes of time in a 4.5 or 5 hour procedure of practice. In that first year and a half, though, I found a few who were getting 10x, 100, 1,000x that much practice. They were learning really fast. This was the initial discovery that compelled me towards all the research I've done since. Sort of like, wow, I brought that back to my dissertation committee. I said, look, I found 3 people out of dozens and dozens who seemed to be learning really fast in spite of this block to their participation. And they were like, well, how are they doing that? I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure they're all doing it in the same way. And they're like, you need 36 people like that to make a scientific claim. And they all need to be doing it independently of each other without sharing tactics. That's the only way this is a scientific finding. Otherwise, it's just journalism. So do you want to do science? I went back and I designed a whole second study to cover 18 out of the top 30 teaching hospitals. The patterns were the same. These folks weren't communicating with each other. And in fact, I was blinded to who I was interviewing. I didn't know whether they were the high potential successful ones because I didn't go visit. I deliberately wanted to avoid that. Turns out they were all doing the same 3 things, all of which, now this gets to your intense stuff to see, would shock your conscience. They should. So they were building skill in ways that, like operating on a patient without the senior doc in the room.
Oh.
Yeah. Or watching YouTube a lot, like as in a lot. But in very precise and particular ways. There were clips of surgery on YouTube, and the average resident would watch an hour-long clip, say once. the across the I called them this process shadow learning
Uh-huh.
because it involves deviance. You're bending rules to get your skill. Across all of these sites, the average shadow learning person resident would spend, say, 100 hours watching that 1 hour video. So they'd watch it 100 times. Or they'd spend 100 hours, but in fact, towards the end, they're just watching a 3-minute clip 12 times. And they're like, what's happening with the left hand right there?
But they wanted to learn.
Exactly. And they were doing, by the way, I've chiefs of surgery at all these institutions saying, watching movies doesn't make you an actor. Watching video wouldn't make you a surgeon either. That kind of stuff. So it was not viewed as an appropriate way to learn how to do surgery. And yet those were the only people who were actually getting good.
And what's the time commitment compared to an actual physical resident? Like if I was old school before robots, would I be spending the equivalent amount of time just being in the operating room?
Yeah, exactly. So in fact, there are papers in surgery on participation as a way to build skill. They call it dwell time. That's their term for it in the surgical domain. And basically the assumption was if you're in the OR, that's the best place for you to build skill. And so what really counts for your career and skill is dwell time. When in fact, the dwell time stayed the same with robotic surgery. It's just all you were doing was sitting there watching a surgeon do it and getting told you were incompetent in front of everybody else when you got your 7 minutes to try to operate. So your dwell time was the same. It's no longer a useful metric. It's really, are you struggling near the edge of your capability, but not beyond it? Are you sweating in the console? Are you focused? Are you working on something that's difficult for you? Is there good coaching present? All the stuff we know that is important for learning up close. It's just, in fact, one of the findings in that paper was on, I called it helicopter teaching. If that junior person is optional and then you give them a shot anyway, boy, oh boy, are they going to get a lot of real-time critical feedback. Like, no. Like, it's, there are quotes in the paper that would just make you think, like, how could you possibly even learn anything? Having somebody hover over you and critique every motion, every.
Yeah. Hey, Jess. So Jessica worked in a company called Coursera for a long time. I'm thinking about this. Are you thinking about this as we're talking about him, Jess?
I was, but I was actually thinking about a company that I talked to the other day. I'm in venture, so I'm a venture capitalist, and this company's doing VR, but for the trades. Right. So plumbing and it's fascinating because, and there's sort of this movement happening with younger kids who may not be going to college. It's expensive or did go to college, but they don't want to be a knowledge worker. They don't want to work at Facebook, Meta, sorry.
Yeah.
I'll never call them Meta. It just doesn't roll off the tongue.
We're not going to do that.
And so they're moving to the trades. And I think it's fascinating. And I think, one of the things that I was thinking about too, and sort of where the world is moving, right, with more logistics, with more things being operational, is that the skills we need to sort of run factories, run things are not the same that you needed 10, 15 years ago. They're totally different. And so how do you, and there's a lot of work and a lot of companies that are trying to hack this through learning, whether it's like VR or there's a lot of companies that are trying to figure out from an AI perspective, matching skills and things like that. No one's cracked it yet, which is fine because they will. But I think that an investment, to your point, Matt, has to be made at not just sort of like going to college, but at a company level, right? Like there has to be an awareness of this. Yes. Yeah. Go ahead, Patty. You're excited. You're shaking.
I'm just thinking as a member of the boomer generation, I was just on the phone. I mean, literally hung up before I got on this call with my contractor who helped me redo my house, and he's retired. And we were talking about, my tree's falling on my house. How about the tree guy oh no, he's retired. What about the cabinet maker? No, he's retired. And nobody has anybody to take these jobs. It's like, who's going to build things for us anymore? And I'm also thinking about, because of this technology, it's a wonderful way because the wisdom is important too. Right? It's not just the technique. It's that cabinet maker that says, well, this kind of wood has these kind of properties. I mean, there's this wonderful melding
Hmm.
potential of not only passing along the technical skills, but the wisdom too.
Yes, exactly. And so that actually is sort of core to the inspiration of the second of the three C's in the book that
Yeah.
constitute the skill code. So the first third of the book is I looked across all my research, all the available research to try to figure out what folks are fighting to preserve. The point of the book, really, the inspiration was I need to pull together what across the economy, across kinds of organizations, different technologies, different occupations, what are folks fighting for who succeed in their learning? They're worth sticking their neck out for and risking of disapproval or their job even. And that's the skill code in the front of the book. So
Mhm.
challenge we've talked a little bit about, which is we need to work where we aren't performing our best and are close to the edge of our capacity and are totally focused, basically.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it's not fun.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's challenge. There's
Mhm.
more in the book. There's a 10-point checklist for each of these. But the second one is about wisdom, actually. I think wisdom's a nice hook. Complexity is don't just get good at the thing you're supposed to be doing. Look left, look right.
Mhm.
Who's
Mhm.
doing what? Why is
Mhm.
it this way today? What's going on over there? This is people in warehousing. I spent the last 3 years in warehousing. Somebody who's working on a line, they start to get curious about outbound. Where are these parcels going?
Uh-huh.
Or how does this technology work? Or, he's good at motivating this team. How do I do that? Different people can follow their nose, but you need to not just get good at a skill, but it's get good at building a portfolio of skills. And that way, you're better able to digest the complexity of your environment so that you can handle surprises. You can predict them. When something happens, you're like, oh yeah, that's because they got backed up at inbound,
Uh-huh.
right? Here's what we got to do now. The person who's done that is doing complexity well, has good, healthy complexity. The last is human connection. We've been talking about that a lot, which is a bond of trust and respect, heaven forbid, between human beings. And part of this gets at skill is not just a way to get better results under pressure. It has to do with our life purpose and meaning. Like, why are you building skill in the first place? Oh, to make money.
Mm.
Huh? How come? Well, because reasons. Those reasons get a little closer to why we get up out of bed in the morning, why we want to get good at something. Is it status? Is it leaving a legacy? Is it producing something in the world? It has to do with redeeming what our life is about. And that earning that respect and trust from others, giving it to others, that's the energy that animates our pursuit of skill in the first place. Like we act like somehow human connections and trust and respect are separate from what skill is and how we build it. But all this digital stuff is no good, or it's not as good as it could be, put it that way, if it doesn't also make human connect bonds of trust and respect more frequent, higher quality, so
Mm.
that you can be inspired and inspire others. That's just part of what makes us get good at stuff.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm, one of the big shots at the warehouse, or I'm the, big shot president of the hospital. What do you tell me to do?
There's a core question you can ask every time you deal with a tech vendor, automation, any kind of productivity enhancing, whatever, process change. How can we do this in a way that gets the productivity gain and leaves the humans involved with more skill at the end of the day? Now, that's not always possible. I'm not a Pollyanna about it, but it often is, and we're not even trying. So a vendor comes in and says, we can do robotic process automation for you and just get these HR forms filled out. Great. Is there a way to do that where everyone who touches that system has more skill at the end of the day?
Yeah, that's
They would
such
go, huh? And you say, you can have a week to think about that. And by the way, someone else will get the bid if you don't come back with a good idea. Technology vendors will start to do that. In fact, this is on the technologist side. Some of them will start to go, hey, we can get brand advantage. We can get more customers if we build genuinely human-centered technology that, yes, when you use it, you get better results. And it will nudge you towards richer, deeper, more valuable skill. Just at the end of the day, you didn't even really notice it. Guess what? You know a little bit more. You can do a little bit more. I did that in that Don't Let AI Dumb You Down post. The back third of that is here's how you can change the core custom instructions in ChatGPT to make it do that to you right now, ground zero. You can, at the end of every session, know a bit about musicology or whatever you might be into, and by the way, have better human connections. You can tell it to nudge you in that direction. I ask it for some code, it'll say, hey, do you know anybody locally that you might chat about this with? That's not what it's naturally configured to do, but now it does that to me. So for an organization where somebody's got power, where they've got a mandate, where they can say no to a vendor, just push. And they'll do it. I mean, they want your money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
That's such a great question, Jessica.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of the tech keeper test.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Right.
yeah. Are my people going to have more skills at the end of the day? I wish I knew
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
thank you.
that's a
This
great
is
question to ask. I mean,
fascinating.
I remember somebody pitching me one time, over and over, whiteboard full of stuff about I'm like, and what at the end of the day, what do I get? You get data. I'm like, okay.
Oh.
I got, I'm in a company full of engineers. We got data. Like now I get my own. He's like, yeah, because HR doesn't have data.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, it's just a failure of imagination, but really I'm not in the blaming mode. The problem is nobody quite owns this problem because it's an
Yeah.
invisible thing we take for granted. It's literally the archaeological evidence for this process is 160,000 years old. It is the
Wow.
bedrock for our civilization. And it's just now we're reconfiguring what work is and how it gets done in this self-serve, isolated digital way, to abstracting away the particulars. It doesn't have to be that way, but now we're kind of taking that apart and we've got to build it better or we won't like the future we're coasting into.
Yeah. Matt, I am just so glad we
Me
got to spend
too.
time with you today. Oh. So we do this little thing on our show called Career Confessions, where people send us in hard work problems that they're trying to figure out and we give them advice. Will you do one with us?
Of course. Happy to.
Okay. Should I advocate for myself and how I've made some of my responsibilities easier? I recently got busted using AI to make my work a bit smoother. I wasn't trying to cut corners. There were just a few tasks that I wanted to streamline. But when my boss found out, they weren't too happy. Whilst there aren't any rules or policies against us doing this, they thought I was trying to cheat the system. I was just trying to be more efficient, and it really helped me balance my workload better. Now I'm in a pickle. How do I patch things up with my team and boss while still pushing for smarter tech use? Matt, what do you say?
Well, this is fun. This is a straight callback to the team dynamics work I did before going back to grad school.
Mhm.
That depends is the typical BS consulting answer. And of
Yeah.
course, I'm going to say that here because we don't know about that manager. That's ground zero. People join companies and leave managers. We all know that. So if this person wasn't pleased and said something like, but, help us figure out how to deal with this stuff or something, even a tiny little olive branch. If you have a good rapport with this person, if in general you work well together, and this was just something you weren't quite sure how to handle, then that's a radically different conversation than if the manager themselves called you out and under no circumstances should you sort of, you're a cheater, that kind of thing. How do you patch things up with your team? Well, there's one universe in which the answer is you don't. Get out of there, right?
Mhm.
So, and by the way, the one thing I can say for sure is this person is in no way alone. In fact, they are a silent, giant majority in organizations right now. You can use this stuff on your phone. Nobody can tell. They got caught. Yeah, that they're 1 out of 10, but
They
8
got
out of
caught.
10 are still doing it. So if there is even a figment of an opportunity, if the relationship's even neutral, then the great power move is to go to that manager and say, great. You know what? I'm glad this came up. I was not comfortable, but the thing to do now I'd like to do with you and the team is let's figure out who else is doing this. Let's not make it a penalty situation because I bet all of us are in our own ways finding imperfect, partial, new ways to use this tech that could help all of us. And in fact, instead of it being something that happens in the shadows, can we, with consent, with giving people space to give it anonymously or something, or maybe a bonus scheme, maybe people could get paid cash, heaven forbid, for coming up with a new idea. let's work up a plan, me and you, to figure out how to convert this hidden activity into valuable, organized activity. Because right now, everybody's trying on their own. We don't know who's doing what. We don't know what's efficient. We don't know what's humane. And then it's all in the shadows, and we miss this giant opportunity. So how about we make a half-hour meeting next week, and we'll just start to plan.
Oh, I
Such-
love that.
It's such a good
Great
answer.
advice.
Yeah, I remember sitting on a panel once with a bunch of people talking about, our employees are going online at work. They're like
Right.
they're like shopping and going to other websites, and so we in HR need to figure out how to write policy that says you're busted if you
Right.
you'd switch your screensaver on so that
I
somebody
know.
would see that you were Googling the answer to something somebody had asked you that you didn't know
That
the
all over
answer to.
again.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
but
is.
It's such a great, and the organizations that figure that out.
Woo.
Yeah,
Gonna do
they'll be on
great.
fire. They'll be on fire. It'll be amazing. And I think that that's a great example, Patty, is sort of like, when the internet first started and everybody got online and people, what? I mean, where are they going to be spending their time? We need to make a rule about it. Just like, people are going to take too much vacation. It's like, no, why don't you just figure out how
And
to
of course that was
utilize it?
that was before every company on God's earth
Yeah.
was online.
Yeah.
Exactly
Right,
Right.
because what difference did it make if you were looking at what was happening at Google or Netflix? Because that didn't have
Totally.
anything to do with, Bear Stearns. Oops.
Right. Yeah, now it's critical infrastructure for the firm, but nobody wants to acknowledge that. And it's getting used by 11 people in 11 different ways. That is
Yeah.
no recipe for success.
Exactly. Right. Make it normal. Figure out how to do it well.
Yeah. And by the way, if this is happening, I hate to say it, that's the manager's fault.
It is.
Right. I mean,
Or the system, or the
Yeah.
I mean, I heard a lot
Because
of this
they
and
may
read a
just
lot
be
of
following
this.
the rules.
Yeah, I read a lot
Yeah.
of this, and what you said is like there's this inherent. You talked about it earlier. There's inherent infrastructure that says we got here because we did it right. Don't fuck with success.
yes, correct.
Yeah.
Actually, that's totally fair. I take that back. It's nobody's fault. It's just normal operations.
Yeah.
That's the right
Yeah.
way to say it.
Yeah.
But if you have any risk that you can take right now, the higher in the, different folks have different tolerance and ability to do it. But boy, oh boy, is there a great return on trying to help everybody learn together right now. Huge.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you to Kathleen Speckert and the whole Edit Audio team.